Welcome back, War Room fans. Yes, the fans are cheering in the background. Here we are. We're starting up our two-part series on the United States. So on the United States videos, as I said at the end of the UK ones, is we're going to do the two battle plans that the United States had at the beginning of the war. And we're going to go through the viability of those plans. The first plan I alluded to was Warplane Orange. That was not the actual plan the United States did, but that was their interwar period plan. Meaning in the 1920s and 1930s, the United States came up with a battle plan. It was called Warplane Orange. And orange was actually the color that the Naval War College gave Japan. And so they gave all the various nations different colors, like UK was red, Germany was black, Italy was green. I forget what color Russia was, but they even had a color for Canada. So they were coming up with all these battle plans in case of a future war. But at the end of the day, the United States was always concerned, same thing with the United Kingdom, or back in the day, Great Britain. Their main concern was a war in the Pacific against Japan. So the United States came up with this plan, and I'm going to try to do historians who have written books on this, and library has been filled with discussions of Warplane Orange and everything related to it. So I'm going to try to give you a 5-minute introduction to the actual history of Warplane Orange, and then we're going to take that and put it into War Room. Because one of the things that I have a great appreciation that Larry did with War Room is that War Room, as I've said in a lot of videos, is when you start the game, you have to come up with a plan. And then once you come up with your plan, you stick to it. That's your plan. The game does not lend itself to doing one thing and then switching streams and doing another thing, and it doesn't work out. And as Larry did in his introduction, that, you know, the whole idea of War Room is we're like the grand commanders of the various nations. And that's what Warplane Orange was in reality. So here's Warplane Orange in a very condensed and very brief format. So the United States in the 1920s and 1930s came up with these battle plans against Japan. And there was 3 basically competing ideas on how to prosecute a war against Japan if that would ever develop. Now, the 3 branches were, the first branch of admirals that came up with the plan, they were called the Chargers or the Pushers. And their whole idea was if a war ever broke out, and we have to remember, guys, this is key to this war plan, is that during the interwar period, you know, the United States had acquired the Philippines. That was United States territory. Here in the Marianas, they had Guam. And they had a couple of these islands, but Guam was the main one on the Marianas. And they had Wake. Okay? So the United States actually had these islands in their possession before the war started. So in war room terms, the United States owns that and owns that. Well, obviously Japan took that when the game starts. So the Pushers, or the Chargers, they always felt Japan would make an aggressive move down here into the Philippines. So the plan, one of the plans of Warplane Orange is if there was ever a war with Japan, the United States would rally all its naval all its assets in charge to the Philippines. Okay? The idea behind this was in their opinion that if the United States rallied all its naval power, they could meet Japan off the Philippines somewhere and wage a decisive battle against Japan's navy and basically destroy Japan's navy in the Philippines. And thus, if the United States destroys Japan's navy, then the rest of the war pretty much will just mop up as the United States Army shows up and starts taking all the islands and eventually makes Japan either concede or they conquer Japan. Okay? Now that's obviously a very generalized, very simplistic discussion of one aspect of Warplane Orange. The other aspect of Warplane Orange, which we're all familiar with, and these guys were the island hoppers or the conservative guys. Their idea was if war broke out with Japan, it's not conceivable that the United States Navy could literally consolidate off the coast of Hawaii, sail all this way over here to the Philippines, and wage a decisive battle. Unlike in War Room, where we don't care about supply and, like a ship running out of oil or running out of food, we don't have to worry about such trivial, mundane things. Well, that was a real concern in real war. So their idea was to use some of these islands like Wake, which was in their possession, as a base, and then jump to another base like Guam, and then eventually jump to the Philippines and wage this decisive battle. Okay? So they both had the same goal in mind, which was find the Japanese Navy, engage them in a decisive battle somewhere, most likely around the Philippines, destroy their navy, and then basically make Japan concede. There was a third group that were roundly sent out of the room by the chargers or the pushers and the island hoppers. And these were the guys who were more in line with the British. Because remember at the end of the British video, we talked about Battle Plan Singapore that the Commonwealth came up with. That was India's and Anzac's plan to combat Japanese aggression, which was create a very large fortified port, major port in Singapore. And so they were arguing that the United States should do the same thing in the late 20s and early 30s. Make Guam a huge naval port, massive airfields. Same thing in the Philippines, okay? Fortify up the Philippines, make it a major naval base and army base. Well, the guys who were arguing against them said, well, first off, that type of plan takes like almost 10 years to build a naval base out of Guam or out of Manila or any other base in the Philippines. Plus, it's so close to Japan that if hostilities broke out, those bases would be taken over very quickly, and there was nothing we could do. Meaning we as in the United States. So they got basically shouted down, and they were eliminated from the plan. Okay? Now, as the war started getting to the late 1930s, they actually scrapped Warplane Orange. Because, once again, what was the problem with Battle Plan Singapore? Rise of Nazi Germany. The United States was now more concerned politically with their ally, Great Britain, and so they focused in on if war broke out against Nazi Germany and we had a war with Japan, they came up with a plan called Rainbow 5, which is what we'll do the second video on, which is what the United States actually did. That was their actual battle plan, which was Rainbow 5, which is a Eurocentric approach. And they adopted portions of Warplane Orange, which was the island hopping campaign, to put pressure on Japan. Now, it's also out of the scope of our game, War Room, but the United States put considerable pressures on Japan pre-war, like restricting trade, putting embargoes on oil. A lot of the things that some people would say, well, that's what led to the war, but that was part of the U.S. plan, which was they couldn't concentrate on both fronts with 100% power. And so they decided in Rainbow 5, which came out in the late 30s, to focus more on the European theater, help their British and French and all the other allies they had over there. So there was political considerations on top of it. Okay, so that's basically what Warplane Orange was. It was a early 30s war plan on how to take the war right to Japan, get right in their faces, and basically try to knock them out as fast as they could. Now, the interesting thing is, let's stop talking about the actual history. Let's talk about how would you do Warplane Orange in War Room. And it's actually set up where we could actually do it, okay? Now, the first thing about Warplane Orange in War Room is we're not going to focus on, the war plan is not the Philippines. The traditional Warplane Orange plan was to get the Philippines. In War Room, the plan is to take back Guam, get the Marianas. Because in War Room, if we take the Marianas, we accomplish pretty much, three goals. The Marianas allows us to strap bomb Japan, which we talked about in the Imperial Japan videos. If the United States can start bombing up here, they only have 8 factories on the mainland. If you knock them out, Japan is out of the war. They can no longer produce units, regardless of how many resources they have. So getting strap bombers here to threaten Japan and to actually bomb them is a key component. The second component of taking the Marianas is once you have land units here, you can then project power into P-13. If you can wrest control of P-13 from Japan, then what that allows you to do is now you can jump into the Philippines from P-13. You can jump down here, you can jump down here, you can start threatening all the oil. Okay? So the Marianas is like the first stepping stone. So you can project power into Japan through air, you can project power into P-13 through naval, you can put land units at sea in P-13, threaten the Philippines, threaten the Money Islands. Now, one of the big things about the Philippines, guys, is don't overlook this, is that the Philippines, because of where it's located, you can then start helping the Chinese out. But remember, it also has iron. Sometimes we get fixated on oil, but there is a certain part of the game where iron is almost as important as oil, because iron is also required to build artillery, to build naval, and to build air. All of China, in China, we got 2 here, and then up here in Peking, we got 1. So there's 3 on there. There's 1 here, that's 4. That's 3, that's 7 iron. 8 iron, because Korea has 1, okay? So once you get into here and you're on the Philippines, you can actually help China start consuming their iron. A big vital resource for Japan. Even if, let's say China's conquered. China, you can't do that plan. You can't really, United States doesn't have enough power to jump in here. But you know what? If you can control their navy, you can start blowing up all the iron right in here. You've already taken one down here. You can jump up here. You can start getting these iron. So there's a lot of opportunities for the United States from the Marianas. If they can project enough power into P-13, take P-13, you can really put the hurt on Japan. So that's what Warplane Orange is for the United States, this Japan first strategy. Now, how do we actually go about it? So remember, the first step is this. That is the target. All this other stuff I talked about is what's going to happen if you take it, but you got to get on the Marianas. It's the most important island in the Pacific, or island chain, I'll call it. It's the most important one. Okinawa is important in later games. Iwo Jima for us is not. In the real war, Iwo Jima was very important because if they took Iwo Jima, the B-29s out of Guam going in Japan could only go, it was basically they could only launch one sortie a day. It's literally like 14 hours round trip. But when they took Iwo Jima, they could launch constant attacks all day long. And sometimes, if necessary, bombers could launch twice a day. Same thing with Okinawa into the southern island chain of Japan. It was so close that bombers literally could be coming in multiple sorties a day if necessary. And also, it just cut down on the time. Even if they only launched one time a day, it cuts down on the crew time in the air, cuts down on wear and tear on the planes. They only have to fly basically a 6-hour trip, round trip. They can drop their bombs 3 hours. 3 hours later, they're back at home. But once again, we don't worry ourselves about that in war room because unlike the real war, our bombers are infinite and can fly all day long, and we don't have to worry about crews. We don't have to worry about everything that in the real world we have to worry about. So, that's Warplane Orange, the historical and the plan for the United States. Now, how do we actually do this? Okay. Notice here. Now, if you want to do Warplane Orange, and the goal is the Marianas, you have two choices. Now, the first choice is really bold and requires you to actually expend a lot of the United States' oil early in the war. And it also is based on a risk. Okay, let's talk about the risk. Because here's what we're going to do. Right off the bat on turn 1, you can send off the 73rd and the 50th into P12. Right off the bat on opening turn 1. Okay? You send in the 4th. That's 3 commands. Okay? Don't worry about the 15th. I'll explain these air units later. Air units are on a delay on the Pacific map, and I'll explain what I mean by that how they're on a delay. But if on the opening turn, you write these 3 commands into P12, and here's where the risk comes in. Japan doesn't write any orders for their Navy up here, okay? If they don't write any orders for their Navy, the first and the third, then these guys are going to come in here free and clear, unless they wrote something crazy like airplanes coming out there. Now, here's one of those things, guys, about the rules of the game, okay? Let's say the first writes an order to go to the P-13, okay? And the United States goes first. So I'm gonna set it up. The United States, because of just how it works out, you're not bidding to go first if you're the United States, by the way, on this opening turn. In fact, if you're gonna do this aggressive move, you bid to go last. Because if you go before Japan, then here's what's gonna happen. Let's say the first wrote orders to go to P-13. Remember, guys, naval units can move 2. So they have 4 units up here. So instead of just going to P-13, the savvy Japanese player, what he's going to do is he's going to move the first into P-12. You have 4 units, he has 4 units, and he's going to engage you in P-12. So right off the bat, you're going to have a naval engagement in P-12. Now, depending on how that combat works out, okay, this could be good or bad. It's bad if the first comes in and wallops the fourth, and Japan has more naval units than the fourth, then these guys are dead on the following turn, okay? There's nothing you can do really to save them because they're going to be sending in guys here. Depending on what they did over there, they got guys in the Philippines. They can just flood this zone with more naval units, and you don't have enough naval units coming up in reserve, okay? So it's a big risk, but if Japan is doing something else and you can get up in here, then on the second turn, you outbid Japan because they're going to immediately freak out that you have 4, because you're going to consolidate them. We'll just say you consolidate them in the 73rd. So you're going to have 2 artillery and 2 infantry. Japan's going to freak out and send their Navy out here. But if you outbid them, those land units can get on the Marianas on the end of, basically on turn 2. Okay? So you're going to have to outbid Japan, and then that gets into that oil bidding game. You need to really watch what Japan's doing. Well, you can watch them, but you won't know what they do until after production's revealed. But what that means for the United States, though, is that on that opening turn of builds, you might want to save a lot of oil. That way you can, when the United States' second turn comes up, they get 8 oil plus whatever's left from the first turn, so that you can get something like 15 oil. So on that opening turn, you might only be able to bid, you might only use 1 oil for production. That way you guarantee you'll have 15 oil, and we haven't even talked about trading for oil, but the United States can trade for oil, where Japan cannot, on the opening turn at least. Well, that all depends on what happens in Egypt, but we won't go there. So the United States can play the oil game right off the bat, leverage your oil to the point where Japan can't even stop them, and they just land right on the Marianas right off the bat. Okay? That's a lot of risk, though. So here's the more conservative plan to try to get there in force on turn 3. Okay? So the one advantage of that aggressive move, though, is it's only 3 moves. And so you can still get your guys in the east, in the eastern United States and everything, and keep moving towards Europe, and don't leave them high and dry. Here's the more conservative play. On turn 1, you move the 4th to P10. You move the 3rd out of Hawaii there. You move the 5th off the west coast here. You can consolidate them up. You're going to have an 8 stack and a 1 stack, I believe. 4, 7, 10. So no, you'll have an 8 stack and a 2 stack. Okay? So we're just going to put it like that to show that one of them's an 8, one of them's a 2. So that was 3 moves. Okay? Fourth move, 64th comes off Pearl Harbor. Fifth move, Aleutians. Sixth move, Alaska. Seventh move, New Zealand. They all come back here. You got a 3, 5, 7, 8. So you got an 8 stack and a 1 stack. Okay, so we're just going to consolidate these up. We're going to say that's an 8 stack there, and that's a 1 stack in the 35th. Okay, we know what we're doing. Okay, so now you have your Marianas push, guys. That was 6 moves. So you still have 3 moves that you can do over here. So you could still do the first up to A2. You can still get these guys up here. You can still fly the 11th over here, because you don't want to ignore the European front completely. Okay. Now, second turn. So the invasion is planned for turn 3. We have all our all our naval units all consolidated. Okay. Everything's good to go. So second turn, it's 2 orders to send in the entire Navy. Okay. Remember, we're going to have an 8 stack and a 2 stack. These guys are all consolidated up, but it's 2 units, and you can send them all into P12. Okay. So that's 4 moves. Fifth move, P17 comes out. Or 17 comes out, 16 comes out. We're getting ready for the air guys to start showing up. You know, so on turn 3, we can land with them. Okay? So that was 6 moves. 7th move, the 73rd comes off. Now, one of the things about air units and naval combats, guys, when you have 10 naval units like this, naval units have a lot of an inherent anti-air. There is no need to send in the 15th to give them like air support in case there's a battle. All you end up doing is having them get shot down. So if you have like 8+ units, especially the surface units, not the subs, you're going to have a ton of anti-air already. You don't need to be sending in land-based aircraft to support them. So then the whole idea here is, if there is a battle here, okay, then what's going to happen is, if Japan gets in front of you and moves in, well, then it just strictly comes down to a battle of numbers, and the United States has to have equal or more naval units left than Japan. If Japan still is being passive, then on the third turn, you know they're definitely coming in on the third turn, but then these guys can all start landing down here in like New Zealand, so then you can have air power coming up on that third turn combat up in P12. Now, once again, there's a lot of unknowns here. There's a lot of, we don't know what Japan's doing on this battle plan. How they react to you, how they're bidding on turn order. And there's still a lot of risk. And the reason why there's a lot of risk is all our land units are on P12. None of these islands are controlled by the United States. Okay? So a lot of people might look at the map and go, well, why would I ever take one or more of these islands? They're not worth anything. It's because, remember, guys, on Warplane Orange, this is the goal. But if we delay the combat 1 turn, let's say instead of being ultra aggressive and going up into P12, we go to P20 with all these guys. And on that third turn, we take like the Gilbert or the Marshalls or both, okay? What that affords you is that when you come up in turn 3, if let's say you hold the Marshalls, if this battle goes bad, you can always write all your land commands then into J27 and Japan cannot stop you because that's a friendly territory now. So that's why you take one or more of those islands. Now, from a tactical standpoint on the board, Wake is the most desirable of the 3 because Wake Island can project air power into P1. Okay, it can project air power actually up into R17. It projects power to where we really want it. The Gilberts, on the other hand, they can go into P13, they can go into P1, and they can go down here to P18. So another aspect of this battle plan is, well, I mean, yes, we're going to the Marianas, but one of my other goals is to protect Anzac and to project power to the Money Islands. Well, then the Gilbert Islands is more important to you because it can project over here, whereas Wake cannot. Marshalls, there's no reason tactically to take the Marshalls. Because of the way the sea zones are, it can go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So it can only project right in this area, whereas the Gilberts can come farther out and Wake can go farther up and a little bit farther over, okay? But that has a lot to do with how you want to approach it. If you want to play it where we're doing Marianas on turn 4. Okay? Now, here's the drawback to Warplane Orange. Is if you're going to bring over these guys, the 69th and the 13th, well, I want even more power coming over here. I want to really consolidate down on P12. I mean, when I show up, I'm coming in force. The problem with that plan is that you're going to consume almost all your commands on the first 2 turns just on the Pacific. And what's going to happen is these guys, and when I say these guys, I'm specifically talking these 5 commands, are not going to have enough commands to be moving towards the European theater. And that's going to cause, if you're playing a multiplayer game where you're playing the United States, but you have an ally playing, let's say, Britain and Russia or whatever, it's just not you playing alone, the British player and the Russian player are not going to be happy with the United States because you're not going to be applying pressure in the first literally 3 to 5 turns on the European map. And it's just going to be Russia and Britain fighting Germany in the crucial first 4 turns of the game. So you have to be aware of that and be confident in your plan, though. Keep assuring them, hey, once I get the Marianas and I can hold it, depending on what Japan's going to do, then I can throw everything at the European theater, and then my whole plan is literally just to hold the Marianas, get enough ground troops there where Japan can't take it, get enough air units on here, and just start going at Japan with air power. And then all these other little plans of taking the Money Islands, helping out Anzac, those are all secondary concerns to what's going on over here, okay? Because you've achieved your battle goal. Take the Marianas. Start stacking it with strat bombers and fighters and taking the fight to Japan. So I've laid it out, guys. You have a turn 1 aggressive move to try to take it on turn 2. I've laid it out where we have a turn 3 invasion of the Marianas and a turn 4 invasion of the Marianas. The problem with the invasion on turn 2 and invasion on turn 3 is you're playing a lot in the blind. You're really playing the turn order game and having to manage your oil, which is also going to mean, what I mean by manage oil is you might have to have a turn where you literally have to bid 15 oil to pull it off if you're doing attack plan turn 2 or attack plan turn 3, which will put a crimp on U.S. production for at least 2 turns, meaning you're not building a lot of naval or any naval, and you're not building any air. So you're going to have to be confident on the plan. But if it works, if you get on the Marianas and let's say turn 2, and you can hold it, and on turn 3 you can reinforce it with all these air units you're bringing up, right off the bat, Japan is in a world of hurt. Okay? So, as with all these battle plans, I don't like to go out beyond like the first 4 turns of the game because too many variables have changed. We don't, we're already doing a battle plan in the blind. I don't know what Japan's going to be doing. What happens if on the opening turn Japan outbids the United States and sends everything down to P-19 and blows up your 4th fleet? Well, my plan was to do the turn 2 attack. I thought that would be really cool, but so much for that plan. Well, back to square one. Then you're going to have to jump back to maybe turn 3 battle plan or turn 4 battle plan. But for the United States on Warplane Orange, everything is always focused right here. Everything is on the P12 zone and on J21. So all your forces are always focused in on taking that island chain. Because once you get there, Japan, you got a stranglehold on them. Okay? So that's Warplane Orange. The 3 versions that you can try to do right off the bat, do the historical, let's just charge in against Japan. Let's create a decisive battle environment, because at some point, regardless of which plan you do, turn 2, turn 3, or turn 4 landing, you're going to have a decisive battle in P12. Japan is going to send their entire Navy in there, and you are going to have a big throwdown. So you just have to manage that in the sense that make sure, regardless of how this breaks down, I can get my guys here, because that's the goal. If I can get all these land units and all my air units on there and lose my entire Navy, and they only have like 2 or 3 naval ships left, that's a win for the United States. Even though they don't have any Navy left, we can rebuild Navy faster than Japan can, but more importantly, we're on the Marianas with air power. And Japan is going to struggle with that scenario, especially if you have like 10 land units on there. That's big time trouble. So that's how we do Warplane Orange. Okay. Now, the next video is going to be Rainbow 5. Now, Rainbow 5 was in the late 30s. They scrapped this Warplane Orange hard charge plan, and the United States Navy decided, because the other thing about the United States was in the interwar period, the United States Naval Command was pretty much well in charge of the United States' all their war plans. Obviously, the United States Army had their own war plans, and the Army Air Force had plans and what they wanted to do. But the problem with the United States always is, well, that's a great war plan, Mr. Army General, to wage war against Germany. How are you going to get there? The United States is an island nation. Granted, it's a really big island nation, but it is an island. It can't get anywhere without its Navy. So the Navy always came up with the war plans. How do we get our ground troops and our air forces where we needed to go? So then we're going to explore Rainbow 5 on the next video, which was the Eurocentric push. How do we help Britain out from getting conquered, but also projecting power, but at the same time keep some of the elements of Warplane Orange, putting a little bit of pressure on Japan. Keep their eyes kind of towards the United States and not going hog wild elsewhere, okay? And then the other video I'm going to have after I do Rainbow 5 is Japan, Imperial Japan's Kantai-Kessen, which was their decisive battle doctrine, because Japan was not in, they weren't in the blind in the interwar period. They knew of the United States' Warplane Orange. And so they came up with their own counter strategy called Kantai-Kessen. And we're going to go over Kantai-Kessen for Imperial Japan. And the last thing I'm going to say from a historical perspective, the difference between Japan and the United States in the interwar period is the United States always had, as I said, the Navy always came up with the war plan because they were going to be the first responders. They were the ones that are going to get us to wherever we needed to go to fight a war. Well, Japan had a different problem. They had split command. The Japanese Navy and the Japanese Army were always fighting on who ultimately was in charge of Japan's overall battle strategy. And Japan, when it came to the Kantai-Kessen, that was a naval strategy. And so we're going to explore Japan's historical Kantai-Kessen, and then we're also going to explore what would have happened if the Japanese Army would have had ultimate say in Japan's intentions during the war and how they wanted to prosecute the war, because the Japanese Army had totally different plans to fight the United States than the Japanese Navy did. So that will be the follow-up video to the United States. And then off we go.